Hello and welcome to episode 133 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. Last month, we had our first audio version of the podcast hit 2,500 views on YouTube, and we reached that milestone in less than 2 days. That number is in addition to the listeners we got for the show on the other podcast platforms. The episode that had the huge success was the third of 3 installments of a conversation with the Sarah Enigma, who asked me questions about Walt Disney World from the perspective of somebody who hasn't been to the parks since before the pandemic. The listener numbers, combined with some positive feedback, made me think this was something very useful to a lot of you. With that in mind, today the Sarah Enigma will be asking me questions about Universal Orlando Resort. This will be the first part of a 2-episode conversation about UOR. We will get to the second part next month, since we've been blessed to get a lot of guests and regular co-hosts returning to the show lately. Before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Halloween offerings at various Disney and Universal parks in the United States. Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party got started last week at Magic Kingdom and Walt Disney World. In 2018, 2019, and last year, I attended Not So Scary, and last year I made sure to bring you pictures and videos of all the different offerings for the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. In 2020, there was no Halloween event at Magic Kingdom due to the pandemic, and 2021 had the After Hours Boo Bash, which was a temporary stopgap party that contained some not-so-scary offerings while making up for the lack of other party favorites with free sodas, popcorn, ice cream, and even more limited crowds. I was lucky enough to attend Boo Bash with my friend Jillian as well. This year, however, I've decided I really have no desire to do Not So Scary in 2023. Disney really has to walk a fine line when trying to put on this party every year. They certainly want to keep it similar and have the same major offerings to make sure word-of-mouth reviews don't lead to disappointments. Listen, if your friend comes back from an Orlando theme park vacation and talks about the awesome parade, meeting Jack and Sally, and riding Space Mountain in the pitch black, you want to know that you can do those things if you decide to go to the party next year. Of course, as Disney tries more and more ways to get locals to pay for hard-ticketed events, they often try to add just enough to these events to entice regulars to get that fear of missing out that's so prevalent in a social media world. In my humble opinion, a few extra treats or 1 or 2 more character outfits can't offset the price and the crowds at this event. For those of you who do head to Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, you can expect the return of the Boo to You Parade, the Not So Spooky Spectacular Projection and Fireworks Show, the Hocus Pocus Villain Spelltacular Stage Show, and trick-or-treating throughout the park. There will also be Halloween-themed meet and greets, photo pass magic shots, and popular snacks for purchase that probably look better on your Instagram than they taste going into your belly. I am not putting down this event for somebody doing it for the first time. I think you will have a lot of fun. Even if you've developed the tradition of doing Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party every year, you probably have traditions that will keep that being fun for you as well. I just think there are better ways for me personally to spend my allocated theme park budget. Taking I-4 East to Universal Orlando Resort, they will be kicking off Halloween Horror Nights on September 1st. Universal excels where Disney struggles with Not So Scary. Frankly, I think HHN might be more popular with locals and regulars who pick up a frequent fear pass than it is with vacationers. Halloween Horror Nights will feature 10 haunted houses, including one themed to Stranger Things 4 and one themed towards The Last of Us. There will be 5 scare zones scattered throughout Universal Studios Florida, and there will of course be an HHN-themed tribute store, which I always love. Because Universal is willing to appeal to a more specific audience than the broad audience that Disney tries to draw for Not So Scary, the merchandise and the treat options can be far bolder. On the West Coast, I think Disney's California Adventure is about to turn what might be the best event at any U.S. Disney park into a major public relations blemish. Once again, tickets to Oogie Boogie Bash at DCA sold out very quickly on the first day they were made available to the public. This caused hundreds of people to complain on social media, and it served as another reminder that Disney's IT department is not nearly where it should be for a company with those kind of resources, especially one that makes technology such a huge part of your visits. It's certainly a delicate balancing act. Disneyland can't afford to just hold Oogie Boogie Bash every night in the Halloween season to keep up with demand, because DCA is needed to balance out crowds with Disneyland Park. Also, the limited crowds for the party are part of the appeal. We wouldn't want Disney to turn this into another not so scary like in Florida and ruin the in-park experience by overselling it. This is undoubtedly a must-do event for theme park fans, but it's one that I think a lot of people are willing to skip if it's too hard to experience it that first time. How will people discover how good it is if they can't get in the door? In addition, it's just adding more frustration to locals and regulars to Disneyland who are already feeling like it's getting harder and harder to just get to the parks. I would hate to see this situation continue to get worse to the point that Disney turns a huge positive into a negative experience for guests. Anyway, that's enough Halloween for now. Let's welcome the Sarah Enigma back to the show. Thanks for being here, Sarah.
It's always great to be here.
We are going to build off something that we did a little earlier, and we had 3 whole episodes of the show where you asked me questions about Walt Disney World from the perspective of somebody who hasn't been in quite some time. I mean, what we consider quite some time is different than other people, but you haven't been in a few years, and you thought you would ask a bunch of questions, and I would get to help people who maybe aren't as familiar with the parks and do want to know these things. It was so successful for Walt Disney World that now we are going to do it for Universal Orlando Resort. You have a ton of questions ready for me, and some of them are going to be informative, some of them are just fun. And let's talk a little Universal.
Great. So my first question about Universal for you is, if it didn't matter what time of year you went, what time of year would you go? And would you go for a specific festival or party? And if yes, which one?
Okay, so crowds wise, I don't think you have necessarily the fluctuations that you have at Walt Disney World. When we talked about this with Walt Disney World, there were very specific times that I thought you want to go either in late September or you want to go in like May or one of those times, maybe the 1 or 2 weeks in February where there isn't something. With Universal, I feel like the crowds never get so overbearing except for in those very big 4th of July weekends. Those types of situations, any place that attracts tourists are going to run into those problems. With Universal Orlando Resort, though, you don't have quite the crowd issues that you have at Walt Disney World. So I would say if I were planning a trip and I was only going to be at Universal for 1 week out of the year, I would try to make sure to go during Mardi Gras, because that is such an amazing festival. I've actually called it the best Epcot festival, even though it's obviously not in Epcot. There's a parade. It has more of an adult vibe than over at Walt Disney World. So Universal can do some things. Like, I'm not saying it's risque or I'm not saying it's like dirty or anything, but it can be a little looser and it can be a little more fun and maybe appeal more towards people who like to drink or people who are adults and don't necessarily want all of their entertainment to be so kid oriented. Mardi Gras is a really, really fun festival, and I think that would be when I would say if your options are very open as to when you can travel, make sure to hit up that festival.
That sounds great. If you have never been to Universal Orlando before, which is the best park and experience to start with?
Ooh, okay. So when we talk about Walt Disney World, we're going to go back to those episodes a lot, I have a feeling, in this conversation. I always say you want to start off with Magic Kingdom because you want to see the castle, you want to get those iconic pictures. It just feels like you're ingratiating yourself into the Disney world, if you will. At Universal Studios Florida was the first park, and you would think that would make that the one that you would want to do first. But I don't feel, with the exception of like E.T., that there's anything that has been around so long or is so iconic that I want to do that first. If I was on vacation, maybe I would do Universal Studios Florida first so that I could do ET, but that would just be because I have an irrational love for that ride. If I'm looking at it from the average guest, I would probably start at Islands of Adventure because Islands of Adventure has a lot more that you're going to want to do, things that you're definitely going to want to get crossed off your list. And my suggestion is, like, if you want to do Velocicoaster, do it at the beginning of your vacation. Either you do it and you decide you never want to do it again because it was too intense, or you're going to want to do it 4 or 5 more times throughout your trip. You want to find that out early in your trip. You want to do things like Spider-Man and Kong, things that you might want to re-ride a few times. I think doing Islands of Adventure first gives you a sense of how much time you have to give yourself to complete Islands of Adventure, because it doesn't take quite as much to complete Universal Studios Florida. And obviously, if you're going to do Volcano Bay, which is the water park, that's going to add a whole different dynamic to your planning. However, I would not start with Volcano Bay because that's going to be the thing you want to do sort of as relaxation from hitting the theme parks hard for a couple days.
That makes sense. That's very informative. So the next question goes a little bit deeper. Which is the best ride or experience in both Universal Studios Florida and Islands of Adventure to do when you start the day?
All right, you're kind of stumping me on this one because I have 2 answers for Islands of Adventure, and maybe you're just going to want to pick one. You either run right to Velocicoaster or you run right to Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure. Probably run to Hagrid's because I do think that does go down more than Velocicoaster. So if you can make sure you get Hagrid's out of the way first thing, and then you can do Velocicoaster, you're probably going to have to wait in a pretty long line for one of them. So it's a matter of picking which one is going to be your wait. I do like the Velocicoaster queue. I think it's interesting, and they definitely are prepared for people to wait a long time in it. But it's not like Hagrid's doesn't also have a pretty cool queue. So really, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other over there. I would say that over at Universal Studios Florida, people just generally like to rope drop Diagon Alley. They just want to get back there as soon as possible and experience everything. But I don't think there's necessarily like one ride at Universal Studios Florida that you have to make sure you get out of the way, especially nothing like Velocicoaster.
What is the best ride or experience to do at night?
Ooh, okay. So I feel like a lot of my answers for Universal are going to be very, very similar because there are fewer rides and fewer attractions than over at Walt Disney World. So just your pool of answers is reduced. But also they have some really big e-ticket experiences that are going to keep coming up over and over again. Obviously, Velocicoaster is going to be on that list. Obviously, Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley is so much more awe-inspiring at night. I've talked about this with Galaxy's Edge over at Walt Disney World. People talk about it with Pandora at Walt Disney World, but Diagon Alley is right there, where at night, when you see that dragon breathe fire and it's dark out and it really has that contrast, it is something to behold. So I know that's not a ride or an attraction, but just walking around Diagon Alley at night is really, really cool. I'm going to go with one or two that aren't necessarily the best, but are maybe some sleeper picks. And that's the train in Seuss Landing, because that has sort of a people mover vibe, like Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, where you're looking over the entire park. And sometimes when it's dark and you're up there at that level, you just get some really, really good sight lines and some good views. And I think Rip Ride Rocket, I mean, roller coasters are cooler at night, right? Like, that's going to be a fairly universal, pun intended, experience, that roller coasters will be better in the dark.
What do you think is the best restaurant in the theme parks? And what is your favorite food item to order?
So the obvious answer is Mythos. That is a restaurant that sometimes wins Best Theme Park Restaurant in the World awards. And it has a big banner outside saying it was voted the best theme park restaurant in the world. It has Mediterranean food, which I do like. I'm a big fan of Mediterranean food. The theming in this restaurant is really cool as well. I've eaten there once and the food was good, and I definitely did enjoy the vibe. But I'm going to go with another sleeper pick, because I think Universal has a lot of underappreciated experiences that maybe aren't the best experience at Universal, but you should still try to do them. And that's Confisco at Universal's Islands of Adventure. Basically, Mythos is on the one side of Seuss Landing, and Confisco is on the other side. Like, they're outside of Seuss Landing, but they sandwich it, if you will. And Confisco has a seasonal hummus, and it rotates 4 times a year. And I have never had a bad one. I have never had a hummus that I didn't absolutely love here. And your bill with a soda will come to like $15 if you get the hummus and a soda. And you can sit in an air-conditioned restaurant, and you can get out of the heat, and you can take a break, have something that's not a churro or a cupcake like you're used to eating at theme parks. Have something that is substantial, that can help you get a boost for the rest of your day. There's hardly ever a line to get in here. That's why I'm saying it's one of those underrated experiences. It is very underappreciated. Easy to just walk up and get in there. There's usually a team member standing outside trying to talk people into it. So I will say that as an underappreciated experience. Then obviously over at Universal Studios Florida, listen, I'm Irish. I love all things Irish. So Finnegan's is going to be my answer. I do really, really love Finnegan's. Some people treat it more like a bar, but that's a good one. And I want to ask you, because I don't know if this is going to come up in our questions later, are you also talking about quick little things to pick up and eat, or are we talking about that later?
We are not talking about that later. So if you'd like to do that now, please share your knowledge.
Okay, there is a crepe stand called Central Park Crepes in Universal Studios Florida, and they have a vegan sausage crepe, but they also have some crepes that do have meat in it. So they have your sweet crepes with fruit and whipped cream and all that stuff, but they have savory crepes. And these savory crepes are really, really good. And you usually have to wait a little bit in a line for it, and it's out in the heat, and you're literally on concrete. So the heat magnifies, and it does take a lot longer than you would think it would at this little stand, but it is worth it once you finally get it. And It's an underrated experience that's starting to be less and less underrated as more people find out about it.
Well, you sold me on the seasonal hummus and the savory crepes. Goodness, they sound good. Another question about food is that the Minion Cafe has opened this year, and I'd like to hear your opinion on the theming and the food.
So the theming is obviously themed towards Minions, Despicable Me. So if you like that IP, you're obviously going to immediately be attracted to this quick service location. It is not my favorite intellectual property, definitely not my age range being attracted to the Minions, but it's cool theming, it's fun, it's very lighthearted. The big thing about it, however, is the food is outstanding. Now, we're going to have to see, just like with all new things at any theme park, we're going to have to see if that quality continues or if we're dealing with them bringing their A game early on and then the quality will decrease over the course of months and years. But the food items that I've had there are filling. They taste amazing. It almost feels like there's detail being put into it. Now we're in a situation where it's a new theme park thing, so everybody wants to do it. It will be interesting to see both whether the quality stays this good and if it's going to be as hard to find a seat a year from now as it is right now, or if it will sort of level out and even out as things progress. But I definitely recommend it. It's maybe a little pricey for quick service. I compared my bowl that I got there the one time, which was a cauliflower bowl, to a bowl that you would get at Satuli Canteen in Disney's Animal Kingdom. The one at Disney's Animal Kingdom is better and a better price, but that doesn't mean that this wasn't a good bowl at Minions. I'm just trying to give everybody sort of a comparison so they know what to expect when they get there.
Well, that sounds really fun, but let's go back now more to rides and experiences in the park. So, which is your favorite ride in each of the parks?
Nostalgia wise, I have to go with E.T. in Universal Studios Florida. It's the first ride I ever rode at a Universal theme park. It is the only opening day attraction still at Universal Orlando Resort. So I'm going to have to go with E.T. just for sentimental reasons. Going over to Islands of Adventure, even though I know there are a lot of great rides over there, I'm going to say Spider-Man. That Spider-Man ride is really, really cool. They did a great job. It's now been open for 20 years or whatever it's been, and every time I ride it, it feels like I'm riding it for the first time. I just get that much enjoyment out of it. And sometimes if the lines are short, if it's not a busy day, I'll just ride that thing 2-3 times in the same day. I love it that much.
That's awesome. Now, since I've been there, we talked about it's been a couple years. The newest ride that has opened since I've been is the Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure. Now, what is your opinion on the Velocicoaster?
Velocicoaster is definitely an intense roller coaster when you're talking about universal levels of intensity. They definitely went for it on this ride. I think the story I love to tell is my buddy Ken, the first time that he rode it, I decided I had done like an annual pass holder preview, and people know I'm not a huge roller coaster fan, so I'm not going to do Velocicoaster every time I'm at Universal or anything like that. And I decided I would go through the line with Ken, but it was early in the morning, a whole bunch of stuff was going on, and I would just chicken exit and let him ride it. But he got off the ride, and I was like, what did you think? How did you like it? And Ken's like, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I think I might have sworn a few times when I was on the ride. And he was getting off the ride at the same time as other people who just rode it with him. And the people behind him came up to me and said, he was saying the most vulgar profanity the entire time, just screaming it because he was so scared. So there definitely is a lot of intensity to it, but the theming is incredible. I know a lot of people who aren't really big into thrills, who my friend Christina in Alaska, when she still lived down here, she got like addicted to it. She would just drive up from the part of Florida where she lived. I don't want to give out too much information about Christina. And she would just drive up for the day to ride Velocicoaster 4 times and then drive back home. This is one of the best attractions in the Orlando area. The only issue with it is if you don't like thrills, you're probably not going to do it.
Well, interesting that we just talked about that because that kind of leads into my next question. And if it's the same answer as Velocicoaster, maybe we'll just pick something different. But which do you think is the most popular thrill ride? And in your opinion, is it worth doing?
So, yes, Velocicoaster is the answer. But I'll go with the second most, which is Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure. This is the Velocicoaster pre-Velocicoaster. This was the big major ride that everybody had to experience on their vacation before the opening of Velocicoaster, and it's well worth it. I mean, everybody loves this ride. It's not quite as intense as Velocicoaster, but it's also not a Walt Disney World roller coaster either. Like, it is more intense than your traditional Disney roller coaster. So, yeah, Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure is an easy pick for that second spot.
Great. Are there any nighttime shows in the Universal parks?
Yes and no, because they are in the process of creating a new nighttime spectacular and they have closed the old nighttime spectacular. So right now there is not one happening at Universal Studios Florida, but we're probably going to get announcements about a new one coming up at some point. I just don't know when we're going to get those announcements.
I know there are some daytime shows like the Frog Choir and Tales of the Bard in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, but I was wondering if there was any other ones throughout the parks and if you particularly like watching any of them.
So my favorite show at Universal Studios Florida, at Universal Orlando Resort in general, and boy, am I going to step out on a really big limb here and say in Orlando overall. And I think I am going to be able to say that is the Bourne Stunt Show in Universal Studios Florida. I have never seen one of the Bourne movies. Like, I'm not coming into this like, oh, I'm so excited to see a stunt show based on the Bourne movies. Like, that didn't seem like something that would interest me. Certainly not as much as, say, Indiana Jones over at Disney's Hollywood Studios. But after I saw the Bourne Stunt Show and the Indiana Jones Stunt Show over at Hollywood Studios was still closed due to the pandemic, I thought Disney was just going to cancel Indiana Jones because it looks so outdated now compared to the Bourne Stunt Show. It's almost hard to describe how good it is to just sit there and experience this stunt show because they do put on more of like a real show than they do at the Indiana Jones Stunt Show in Hollywood Studios. But this is phenomenal. Check it out. Make sure you do it. It is in an air-conditioned theater that is so cold, you're going to want to get out of the heat in the middle of the day anyway, and this is definitely worth it. I would also say that everybody has to see the horror makeup show in Universal Studios Florida. And a funny story about that show, which is very, very humorous while also giving you a look into how they do some of these tricks with cosmetics. But a funny story that I have from that is one of the last times I saw it was still when Walt Disney World had a lot of their shows not operating due to the pandemic. And there was a kid in the first row and something happened pretty early on and the kid screeched like really, really loudly. Like whatever happened scared this kid. And one of the actors in the makeup show said, "Listen, kid, you're going to have to be prepared to be scared. This isn't something like Disney where they try not to scare you." And then the other actor said, "Well, one of the other reasons you can tell this isn't Disney is because we have live shows." And I was just like, wow, that was some pretty good shade. It's a funny show. It's informative. It's everything you want in a theme park attraction. So if you have the time, I definitely suggest doing that one as well. I know a lot of people are ride people and they just want to go from ride to ride to ride to ride. But I think it can be very beneficial to people to experience some of the things that aren't just rides, because that's what makes an amusement park a theme park, is having all of these other things.
Now, if you were scheduling in these shows, because they sound great from your descriptions, how long are these shows approximately? Like something like Indiana Jones Stunt Show, or something more along the lines of like 15 minutes?
I want to say that Born, probably the whole process is a half hour or 40 minutes. I'm not, like, don't quote me on that, but by the time they show you the pre-show and then you're seated and then you watch everything, I think you're giving up a good 40 minutes to an hour of your day. Like, you're going to want to literally block out an hour to experience this.
Thank you. That was a lot of great information.
Thank you so much for being back on the show, Sarah.
Thanks.
Sarah will be back on the show next month with more questions about Universal Orlando Resort. You can follow her theme park content on Instagram at the Sarah Enigma, and her content as somebody dealing with chronic illness on Instagram at sava.wellness. This has been episode 133 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. I have something fun planned for next week. My wife Courtney and I will be celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary. Well, for our 5th wedding anniversary, we were still living in Arizona. We decided to take a trip to Walt Disney World to celebrate. This was really Courtney's first full experience with Walt Disney World, with the exception of like an uncle's company party at Disney's MGM Studios in the 90s. Next Thursday, Courtney will be on the show to talk about that trip. We'll talk about experiencing things for the first time, things that we have found really held up now that we get to go to the parks a lot, and how much things have changed even in that short amount of time since our 2018 vacation. Until then, have a great week.